Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit, episode 47. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, Blabbit is a place where experts come to share their secrets and their tips about so many of the things that we all struggle with, both in business and in life. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach and presentation expert out of New York City. And I work with clients about being very clear with their message, making sure their messages resonate both with themselves and with their listeners. Glenn?
Hi, guys. My name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working in coaching, teaching, mentoring, managing, and performing sales tasks for about the last 20 years, just trying to become the best orator and communicator that I can be, and I'll pass that along to others. Joanne, thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. And thank you for having me back. I really look forward to my conversations with both of you. So my name is Joanne Heyman. I refer to myself as an integrative coach, which means that I integrate what I believe are the most powerful practices in both personal and professional development. People used to ask me if I was an executive coach or a life coach, and I said, yes. So that was the birth of integrative coaching. And what I bring, I don't know if it's maybe a secret, but maybe a special sauce to my work, is that I spent the first 25 years of my career in senior management or running mission-driven organizations. So even though I work with leaders across sectors, I bring a mission-driven lens and a practitioner's perspective to the work that I do with individuals and teams.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Joanne. I tell you, you are one of our absolute favorite guest experts because of so many of the insights that you give us. Now, I was just thinking of something as you were doing your introduction, which is how closely aligned both a personal mission statement and a business mission statement can be. Mm-hmm. And I think that really leans right into one of the current topics. It's so important right now in our lives to move forward. And you earlier, before we started broadcasting, we're talking about PersonalManifesto. Mm-hmm. Could you delineate that for our listeners who may not be familiar with that term?
Sure. So I think of a personal manifesto as a souped up resume bio summary, like on steroids. A personal manifesto is your statement about who you are, the contribution that you want to make, the value that you add, and what excites and delights you. So it is a statement that weaves together all of who you are. So instead of just kind of a series of data points, which is what a not very well done resume might end up looking like, it's something that comes alive. It's to the work that you all do. It's your story. And a personal manifesto is something that only you can say, because it weaves together all of these different elements. And there are a lot of I am statements in it. So I am a force for change in the world. I believe in artists and arts. I am an advocate for. So I do encourage people when they're designing a personal manifesto to make a lot of these I am statements. They may never see the light of day in terms of anything that you write or publish online, but they have a lot of energy in them about who you are, what you are looking for, what your dreams are, what your goals are, and what you want to offer.
Now, if you take all of those and you weave them together, I know this sounds like a momentous task, but wouldn't one statement become like a mantra, the driving force of the mantra? I know there are a lot of elements that go into it, but eventually doesn't one kind of rise to the surface that really becomes your daily mantra?
It does. It's a great question. And I know you, as you and I've discussed, that you have like the bumper sticker statements. And so yes. A really well done personal manifesto can be distilled into a statement. So my bumper sticker, to use your language, my bumper sticker is declare yourself a contribution.
Nice.
And so if you were to read a personal manifesto that I draft, it would have a lot in there about the sense of a contribution to make. And it also reflects the way that I coach people to look at what contribution they can make to the world, to their team, to their family, to themselves, right? It can go in a number of different directions.
Mm-hmm. You know what I was thinking about as you made that statement, and the first one is, I know a lot of driven people kind of suffer with this a little bit. So when you're coaching people, how do you help them separate and understand that you have to have a business time and a personal time? Otherwise, if you don't really have any time for yourself at all.
One of my favorite topics, Glenn. Thank you for that soft toss you didn't even know you were giving me. So I talk frequently about barbells and how we hold these things that feel like they're in opposition. And one of them is boundaries and integration. Like this is one I talk about the most. So if you think of yourself as the bar in between boundaries, what you're talking about, and integration, a lot of the way I coach, it's really important. And it's important to understand that without healthy boundaries, you can't integrate and bring your best self either to work or to home. Right? So if you don't have those sort of ends of that bar, it's going to be very, very difficult. And so especially as we are, have coming out of, lockdown over the pandemic, people are contemplating how they're going to be working totally remotely, totally in place, more likely hybrid. Those boundaries that you're referencing become that much more important. So I find that if people are very intentional about it and communicate it to your line of work, if you are setting boundaries, one of the worst things you can do is not tell people what they are, right? So you have to communicate them to the people at home and at work. So my clients know that I don't check email or my phone after 9 p.m. I have an end to that part of the day. Now I stop working maybe a little bit before that, but I might still be checking on things. But they also know that, after a relatively early hour in the morning, they can find me. So that boundary would be useless if I didn't communicate it. So boundaries are really important. And I want to also be clear, and this is going to sound slightly counterintuitive. They're neither the hard steel walls, nor are they porous. They're a good boundary makes sense in the moment, right? The moment can be a couple of months. It could be weeks. It can be a year. It could be while I'm in this job. And so one of the things that I think is freeing for people is to say, these are the boundaries I want to set for now. This is where I am. This is what I'm looking to accomplish. This is what I need to do to preserve my energy for the things at home and work that matter.
And it is, so much of it is about being clear about expectations that others should have for you, plus the expectations you should have for yourself.
Absolutely. It's otherwise you're making it much harder on everyone, yourself included.
Yeah, I think it's very important because it's become very easy for some people to think that they can just email you from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. and think that you're going to respond to that. And so I think without those clear boundaries, you are more optimal, or it's more available to have errors, have miscommunications, have anger feelings.
Mm-hmm. And there's another kind of boundary integration thing that I want to raise that is not physical or logistical, but I think is really important, which is the difference between the boundaries between vulnerability and too much information. And so now we're asking a lot of leaders in terms of being vulnerable. We talk a lot, thank goodness, about empathy and trust. And we want enlightened leaders to give evidence of authentic evidence of vulnerability as a way of sharing part of themselves and inviting others to do so. But the boundary of that is TMI, right? You don't want to be sharing things that are not necessary to share, that can't be taken in constructively by the person listening to it. And so I think that there's an invitation to think about boundaries in very creative ways now, and integration in very creative ways as we go back into, I should say, new structures of working and perhaps more enlightened ways of leading and managing.
Do you find that leadership now, after this turnover that we've gone through, this collective crisis, do you find that leadership is more receptive to the messages that you send? Do you feel that? Not to say that they didn't listen before, but do you think that there's an uncertainty, there's a shifting of the ground underfoot, and therefore a little bit more of a need to maybe open up perspective and scope as a leader?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And the short answer is yes. But I'll make it a more interesting answer, hopefully. This past year and a half has been incredibly difficult in so many ways. But I'll make it a more interesting answer, hopefully. A little feedback there. One of the things that I have seen among my clients is that they realize that the pace at which they were going was not sustainable for many of them. And so there is an openness and a real interest in doing things differently. I will say there are also some real concerns. And so neither I nor many people I know have all of the answers around what the most effective hybrid cadence, structure can look like. So one of the things that I think my clients and others with whom I speak are open to now is a version of what I just said a couple of minutes ago, which is, let's try this for now. Like, let's think of everything. Let's take sort of an agile design methodology approach and say, let's try this and see how it works. And I think one of the keys to doing that, again, is to communicate it effectively, to say, we're going to try this for 6 months. And then to be very clear, if you can be, certainly for yourself, but also with your team, how are you going to evaluate whether or not it's been successful? So that's another piece of it. It says, at the end of this period of time, we're going to look at productivity. We're going to look at how, people self-reported levels of energy. We're going to look at these different markers to determine whether this experiment is a successful one or not. And so part of the opportunity here is to not have to solve the problem forever, but to come up with a smart approach for the foreseeable future. And you determine what that is.
Mm-hmm. I just got a new bumper sticker, Paul. Communicate, keep score, and win.
There you go. I like it.
Yeah. And keeping score and winning are so related to each other. I was actually coaching a team yesterday, a team of media leaders. And they realized they wanted to be able to capture and communicate more of their wins along the way to the big win. Mm-hmm. And that those little wins, when you communicate them, they make people more motivated. They build confidence honestly. And you don't get to the big win without a bunch of small ones.
Sure. Haven't you found out over the years that sometimes people get enamored with that big victory, that, like you just mentioned, if you can have 10 steps there, it's a lot easier to take up 10 steps than to leap up onto a boulder. And it just makes everything a lot more achievable. And like you said, you're excited because you met this goal, then the next goal, then the next one.
Right. It's like when I do work with my clients, helping them build endurance and resilience. And I use the metaphors of elite athletes and training. If you're I always like to call out my extraordinary brother who has completed, I don't even know how many Ironmen. And when I asked him, how do you wrap your head around that, it's the beginning of the day and you're going to swim 2 miles, cycle 100, and then because you have nothing else to do that day, run a marathon. It just is mind boggling to me. And he's like, you small benchmarks along the way. You don't get up in the morning and think about all that you have to do to get to the very end. You're like, oh, I need to get in the water and I need to pass this one and I need to get to the end and then I'm going to come back. Break it down. So I feel like athletic preparation, especially for these kinds of extraordinary feats, has a lot to offer leaders and managers in terms of and how we think about it and how we break it down so that we can go the distance. Mm-hmm. Where in the case of winning is not necessarily beating. Winning is just getting over the finish line.
Sure.
Finish lines in the case of an Ironman.
Let me ask you a question about, again, I'm really fascinated, as I'm sure everyone else is, with what's going to happen next. And we talk about moving forward, putting full steam ahead. Let's do this. Let's get things done. Let's be bold. That's been a big theme so far, even today. What happens when you make a mistake? What happens when you think something is a really good idea as a leader, as a team member? You've declared something really bold, maybe not personally, but within the moment, within the scenario, what's a recovery method that you recommend to people when they find themselves in that position of, okay, adjust?
First of all, you just own it, and you own it without blame. That means you don't blame yourself and you don't blame other people. I like to challenge myself and my clients to live lives in which they make absolutely no excuses, which doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, but you don't make excuses. You really try to understand why something didn't work. So you own it, you claim it. This didn't work. Step number 2, let's find out. Let's figure out why, right? Because the stupidest thing we can do is make the same mistake again. So it didn't work. Why didn't it work? What is there to learn from it? And how will that inform what we try next? So for me, it's a pretty simple formula, and it's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen, in all these different areas. And part of it also, to something that you guys said earlier, is you set up expectations that, we're going to do everything we can to succeed, but we may not. And if we don't, here's how we're going to handle it. Again, align expectations, be clear and communicate them. And I am just, there's also, I talk a lot about nuance when I'm with both of you and in my practice. And there's a difference between blame and responsibility. So not assigning blame doesn't mean that there aren't one or more people who have responsibility for what happened. But the language, because I know you are so attached to beautiful language, the language and the tone that we choose is really, really important, especially when things don't go well.
Don't you think you almost have to embrace those? Because, as I don't remember if it was Ford or Edison made the comment, they never failed. They just figured out another way not to do it.
That's great. Yeah, exactly.
That is the quote, and it is Edison.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. It was one of those two.
If you go in with curiosity, sort of an open mind, the desire to succeed, but the understanding that you may not, it's hard for it to be a complete failure because you're going to get something out of it.
Well, and you talk about communication earlier. I think we're at a time now where it's paramount not to have people that are just always going to say, yes, Joanne, you're the best person. Everything you do is perfect. I mean, the more kind of diversity with ages, with different types of people, I think that's when you're really going to be able to explode if you do communicate and take in different ideas, because that's what makes some companies great, is because they have people that, contradict one another a bit.
Right. Well, that's why, what started a number of years ago as diversity, that became diversity and equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, what you're talking about. And now to add another letter, be belonging. So how do we ensure inclusion and belonging? It's inviting in voices, listening to them equally, and taking action on ideas, or not taking action based on an idea that comes from a new source who has a different perspective than you do. And that can be age, that can be gender, that can be race, that can be ethnicity, that can be political viewpoint. One of the hardest ones for us now in this country. And so welcoming in those voices and treating them all seriously, and I'll use the word again, with curiosity, I think can be very helpful.
Now, it reminded me, we spoke on the phone several weeks ago when we were arranging to have you be here on Blabbit. And you had brought up a phrase which, Glenn will vouch for this, I have utilized probably every week since I heard you say it. So now I'm going to do the respectful thing and bring it up and attribute it to you and ask your thoughts about this phrase. And you may remember it. It may be paramount, it may not, but it resonated with me. Okay. And that is, given the circumstances. What's that?
No, now I want to know what it is.
Well, yeah, the master of suspense. So given the current circumstances that are going on right now, you described it as talent is on the move. And I love that phrase. We have been using it and using it and using it. And now I get to tell everyone in the Blabbit world, here's the lady who said it.
It's on the move. I was just coaching a chief executive in South Florida before I hopped on the call with you guys. And I was talking about talent being on the move with him. So, yes, so this is a seller's market. I mean, it is the diametric opposition to where we were a year ago.
Yeah.
Which was a tragic moment in many ways, including young people coming out of college and looking for their first jobs, young people in general looking for jobs, or anybody. Horrible. So now we're in this environment where people are, it's a booming job market thanks to incredible public policy from the Biden administration, some really great thinking by people who are in the private sector as well as the public sector. So a lot of good reasons and good people creating this momentum now. But what it means is that after a year of people working in very different ways and really examining what's important to them, talent, right? People are saying, how do I want to work? How do I want to live? Where do I want to live? I want to rewrite this script, I think. And so I'm seeing it across industries. I'm seeing it across ages where employees are thinking really seriously about what they truly want, what it truly matters. Now, for many of us, we truly want a job, right? So I'm not saying that this is about, sort of going off and going off the grid and not working, and I wish I had access to data. If I knew you were going to ask me this question, I might have done a little bit of research. But I know from just the way I absorb news that there are a lot of studies that are showing what we're talking about, which is how labor is moving and setting different terms for those people who have. And I want to be really clear about this: for those people who have the ability. This does not apply to everyone in the U.S. job market. But for those who have the ability, there's a lot of interesting questioning about what and how to work and where. And so companies are having to think strategically and in new ways about what it means to attract talent. It's not necessarily going to be the free snacks and beer on tap. It's going to be something different. It may, it is going to, in all likelihood, involve flexibility. It's going to involve evaluating performance in new ways. And so people who are seeking jobs are in very different kinds of conversations now about what it is they need and want, as well as what the companies need and want.
It's interesting you say that, because I've kind of been firsthand with the 20-ish cycle here the last year, with having a pair of twins that are going to be 24 and their boyfriends and doing jobs. And I found it amazing when some people are complaining you can't find a job and you can't do this, where I've seen one daughter's boyfriend go from tech company A to tech company B to tech company C because he was in a niche and they're kind of headhunting people. Mm-hmm. I saw another daughter that got 3 offers before she finally found the job that she wanted, and had 2 promotions in the first 6 months. And then her boyfriend that literally graduated college within 10 days had 3 interviews and a position that he wanted.
Wow.
So there's openings out there, I think, if you have the right initiative and you can set yourself apart.
Yep, I think that's so true. And I think that we'll go back to sort of the balance and the nuance issue, right? You can't be ridiculously demanding. So, I'm not talking about having your term sheet, and saying, if you don't meet this, there has to be some sort of sense of appropriateness. But within that large container of appropriate, I think that there's room for compromise or healthy negotiation. Mm-hmm. And I think that the criteria that people use for the positions that they are interested in may be shifting.
Well, I think it comes back to a phrase that I learned a long time ago in negotiations is I can always meet your price if you can meet my terms, or I can meet your terms if you can meet my price. And it's the same type of thing with a salary negotiation or an employment negotiation, I would assume.
Yeah, very well put.
Well, let's go full circle on the whole idea of the personal manifesto and the idea of negotiating. When you're in that environment, doesn't it help to know very well some of the things that you are going to say? Now, this is the public speaking side of me. I know, Joanne, you brought up the idea of personal manifesto. In other words, you need to say these things to yourself.
Yes.
But then you also need to say what it is that you want, I believe, out loud, and be able to listen. Don't be surprised by your voice asking for the things that you really want.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that so many people fall short of that. Going back to a term I use all the time, don't play a really good negotiation or a really good game just in your head.
Yeah.
Make sure you get out there and speak the words. As you know, not only does it give you practice and makes you more comfortable with delivering those words, but spoken words have a lot of power.
They do.
In the universe. They tend to attract.
It's so true. And so the personal manifesto, as I said, is not something that you would transcribe literally into your LinkedIn bio or onto your resume, but it's a way for you to find language and energy. And again, I was just coaching around this morning. As I said, I start early. I always encourage people to think when they're going into this kind of a negotiation or an interview. It doesn't just have to be a negotiation. To think about two things. What have I contributed, and where do I want to grow? And so if you can, and for that, you really do need to do some preparation. What has my contribution been? And if it's in an existing institution, right? So, what have I done over the past year? If you're looking to shift, where have I contributed in the past? Being able to speak with both data and story about what your contribution has been is incredibly powerful. But then also to acknowledge where you want to grow, not just where you want to go. And then it becomes an interesting conversation. And when I've prepared clients for very high level, high intensity interviews, what I task them with doing, which is onerous, but I think appeals to a lot of what you were just saying, Paul, is I say for every single accomplishment you have on your resume, I want a story. I want you to have a story to tell about each one of these things. Because when you go in, you put that piece of paper aside. You don't look at it, right? So you prepare, and then you put your notes aside and you go in and you have a conversation. And the conversation's about story.
Well, going back to the idea that you've been bringing up here today about nuance. And I think that's a great way to think about it. If you give people the advice, make sure there's a story with everything that's going on. I would say the easier entry into that is what you said before about what did you contribute? Because so many people, when they think about their work experiences or going on a job interview, it's all about, in their minds, what have I done? This is what I've done. And that's a little bit of a black and white conversation. Yes. Whereas what have I contributed is really opening the door to experience and to an insertion and integration and a weaving of values.
Absolutely.
Because it speaks a lot about you.
Absolutely. And I will share a construct that I just offered to my CEO client earlier this morning, which was he had written a really beautifully done self-evaluation. The data was in there, the story was in there, whatever. And I said, this is great. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take this and I just want you to construct the entire thing as a series of from-to statements, both in terms of what you achieved last year, individually and as an institution, and what your goals are for this year. So, for example, when he was talking about his board of directors, he wants board development. I say, no, what you want to say is we want to go from a board that is good to a board that has diversity, commitment to committee service, and a special engagement plan for each member around raising money. And so if you think about from to in terms of accomplishments and goals, it lets you tell the story is where are we starting? And then where do I want to take us? Or where do I want to go?
Hey, Paul, I missed this. John Soon was on and said, the we are winners. Anytime I hear that I'm a winner, it always makes me happy, since this is episode 47. And he said, not small wins, all wins are big.
Nice.
That's great.
Thank you, John. We certainly appreciate that. And, one of the things that I really appreciate about the segments that you're involved with here on Blabbit, Joanne, is so much of what you do, what we all three of us do, is really based in the way you frame the language. It really is. And I say you can have a change of mindset, but if you're not communicating it with clarity, it doesn't really serve that much purpose, right?
Right. What are your expectations? What is, I say also people like, sometimes I have fun when I'm facilitating workshops on communications for teams. I'll have everybody write on a Post-it note, sort of the guide to communicating it with me. And then they sort of write down the best way to be communicated with, and then they go and they put it up on the wall. And then people wander around the wall like it's a little gallery. And so I say, if you know that you don't respond well to text messages, tell people that's not the best way to get my attention, or maybe it is the best way to get your attention. It may be that you do not want any interaction until you've been in the office, if you're going into the office and you've had a half an hour to do whatever. Let people know. If you don't tell them, shame on you for not. So the first is do a little bit of the work to understand the best way for people to communicate with you. That's your internal work. And then tell people, which again, it's not like an ultimatum, but it's going to help everybody succeed.
Well, and you mentioned text messages, and that led right into the question I was about to ask with the message is also the tone. If you have the person up there that's monotone, they're never going to motivate everyone. If they're the rah-rah person, they're not going to be taken seriously when it's a negative time to have a real conversation. So how much do you speak with people about the tone and being real? And that's why I hate text messages or emails, is there is no tone in there. So you have to interpret what the person was saying.
Or I would say, Glenn, to that, if there's no tone, there is tone, and it's not a good one. The absence of tone can be misconstrued. It's a great question. I talk a lot about tone because you're right, it's essential. I mean, if you say something negative in a cheery voice, it's like cognitive dissonance, right? What's going on? Similarly, if you want to get people enthusiastic and you're talking like this, it's not going to really sound good, right? So you have to, the tone and the words should go together. And to what Paul was saying earlier, sometimes it just takes practice. It also just takes thought. And thought takes time. I say that the difference between reacting and responding is time and thought. And both of them are required. You need them together in order to move from reacting to a more thoughtful response. That also helps inform your tone. How I often say, when people are preparing for presentations or in particular difficult conversations, you're going to have all your, what are the points you want to score? Which of course, I would say you don't really win a conversation. So it's not about winning or being right. So what I will do is I will coach my clients to think about what it is they want to convey. And again, do the preparation and then put it aside. And then take a little bit of time to think, how do you want people to feel when it's over? So if it's the end of a presentation or wrapping up a hard conversation, it's not just what you've said. It's how are you and the other people involved, or other person if it's a one-on-one, feeling at the end. And tone is absolutely a part of that process. Because if you want, I'll give you a concrete example because I think that makes it easier. I was coaching a managing director who was about to go into what she thought was going to be a very difficult performance review with her boss. And I said to her, she had all of her points, right? Everything she'd accomplished, what her contribution was, where she wanted to grow, right? All of that, really, good student. And then I said, how do you want him to feel at the end of this review? How do you want him, your boss, to feel? And she said, I want him to feel like I'm on his team and that I get it. I said, all right, so then choose what you say and how you deliver these points with that goal in mind. And then I said to her, what I often say to my clients, and text me when it's over so I know how it went, because I'm going to be thinking about you and I want to, don't wait until our next call to let me know how it went. And so she did. And she said it was a huge success. And I said, well, what happened at the end? And she said, we got up and hugged each other. right? There was a recognition, we're on the same team. Now, that to me speaks volumes about the importance of tone and being very intentional about how you want to feel and be once you have delivered your information.
Well, one thing I want to follow up on there is, you said, you don't win in a conversation, but you can definitely lose by not
Really good point.
and making someone angered or hurting a relationship. So I think as much thought needs to go into every conversation we have as we do just our professional ones.
It's so true. I never thought about that, Glenn. You can lose a conversation.
Yeah.
Actually, you lose a lot more that's truly valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just a quick question about tone and actually technology. And what's interesting is that I've been a public speaking coach for over 12 years, over a dozen years, and I never really embraced utilizing video recordings all that as much as I do now, and simply because we are all forced to utilize some sort of technology to really be able to interact with everyone. Do you find that people are willing to record themselves to get an understanding of tone? Because I know that there are times where my tone may not be appropriate in business or personal life. Sometimes we miss the mark, and it's hard to be aware of that. I know as coaches, we tend to be very much, here, listen to my advice. And sometimes that can come off as being just a little judgmental. I don't know. So do you use technology? Do you advise that some of your clients utilize that to work on their tone?
I don't, but now I'm going to.
I think it's invaluable.
It's really great. I thank you. No, I haven't. And as I'm listening to you, I'm like, this is a great thing for me to suggest people do. It's funny because I also, I'm an adjunct professor at the graduate school that I went to. And I lecture on professional development. And so I will say to the students, I want you to practice your pitch, because we talk about, pitching in networking environments. And I say either practice it with somebody you live with, record it on your phone, or just look in the bathroom mirror. But you have to practice. Now, what I'm asking myself is why would I say that to the students and not to my clients? There's no good reason. So thank you. I think it's great.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like hearing yourself or seeing yourself for the first time on video and going, oh, okay.
Right. Exactly. And what's really interesting is that you do want to raise the stakes. Now, I don't know if I'm sure that you guys have all experienced this, but when I work with a client for multiple weeks, months, years, there's a familiarity. There's a comfort that they have, first of all, in being transparent and being vulnerable and sharing what their struggles are. That doesn't always serve the higher stakes of a moment when you do have to communicate something in a way that needs to persuade somebody. So I find that recording raises the stakes just immediately. If you say, okay, we're going to record this right now, suddenly there's like a little bit of oh, okay. So I feel a little bit more nervous, which is actually good because you do want to sort of recreate the way that it feels. So there's a lot of bonuses to it. And it's so easy these days. You don't even have to work very hard.
No, it's so true. You mean we can all record ourselves on our phones?
Yeah. You can record right here on all of these platforms that we use.
Yeah, it's true.
Zoom or whatever you're using to, provided that everyone is in agreement about making the recording. But I love it as a tool for that, for really getting
great advice. Really great advice. Thank you.
Well, and the other side of the teeter-totter, if you will, is a lot of us are very hard on ourselves. I know the first time I spoke, I hadn't spoken, in front of a group on stage for a while. And 3 years ago, I did a presentation and thought it was terrible. I beat myself up about it for a little period of time. And then it was probably a month before I finally watched the recording and I realized, hey, I wasn't that bad. I just had a group that I couldn't get to engage.
Yeah.
So I think it's good for multiple reasons. I'm sorry.
No, it's so true, and I think there should be a little warning sticker with this conversation, which is that we all tend to be our own worst critics,
right?
And so I think it's also don't don't be too hard on yourself. Watch or listen with, I'll use the word I used earlier, with curiosity and a kind of a question about, how did I do? And, did I achieve what I was looking to accomplish? I remember the first time I shot a group of videos for my own marketing, and I was embarrassed that I was sort of, I was just like not pleased with the way it looked. And I was picking apart my appearance. And the wonderful woman who does my marketing with me and has for a number of years said to me, first, you look fine. And second of all, that's really not that important. What people want is to hear what you have to say. So like, get over it. And it was great advice.
Right. Well, what I find is really interesting too is I've watched video of myself, and I can definitely recognize when I'm trying too hard, which is an interesting quality because I help people get used to dealing with the nervousness or the public speaking anxiety. And I feel that a little bit from time to time, not as much as some, and I'm also fairly clear when I'm speaking. But sometimes if you're trying too hard, or you seem like you're too confident about what you're saying, you always have to weave in that authenticity. And that's a big reminder for me. And I love what you were saying about curiosity, because I find that is an easy door for me to access. Is just be really curious. Like, don't know what you're going to say next. Just, as we often say here, Glenn, work without a net.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about preparation before when I was talking about going into conversations. It's also a reminder that we need to prepare, right? Most of us are, good students, we want to prepare, but that if we're not in any way spontaneous, it's going to be flat or boring or rigid or something. That spontaneity has got to be a part of any sort of presenting mode. Otherwise, you're just going to come across as sort of robotic or rigid or inauthentic.
Yeah. We like the sound of fresh cooking.
Well, we have to remember that, at least two of the three of us have never been a paid actor. So to read something in front of the camera isn't easy for some of us. To naturally respond and have a conversation is much simpler.
Right. Practice. Your boy,
Right.
practice listening to yourself, practice the video. And I would say what I say to the students, practice with somebody whose opinion you value, who can tell you what's going on, whether that's use of filler language or some sort of a nervous tick. Invite in that kind of feedback.
And I have a question for both of you. Don't you find that it's kind of more difficult to do these types of things until you can get past your own fears? I say this because I used to do voiceovers for my videos or my clients' videos and stuff like that years ago. And it would take me 5, 10, 15 different takes before I finally got what I wanted. Until one time, for fun, for a 5th grade basketball team, I made this video, and I made it with a hype voice like a Vince McMahon. And once I learned how to right, wrong, or different, be a jackass online, now all of a sudden I could be me, and I was much more freeing. So what are your experiences with doing that stuff and learning how to get past your own fears?
I don't have a ready answer for that. I have to think about it for a minute, because it's a very provocative question. Normally what I would say to get past fear is just do it. What's the worst that can happen? But interesting what you're saying about sort of taking on a persona as a way of getting past fear. I haven't ever tried that. But what I do coach people on that I think is related is when I'm coaching around executive presence. And if people are kind of challenged at thinking like, well, what are those ingredients of executive presence? I'll say, well, think of 1 or 2 people who have it, who just really have what you think is, not what I think, what you think is executive presence. And then see if you can figure out what are those elements. Is it style of speaking, right? Tone and word choice? Is it style, like the way they're dressed? Is it the way they might lean in? is executive presence a kind of a pacing that is marked by listening? Like you can actually tell that somebody's listening. Is it decisiveness? And so I find that if people can't figure out what it is for themselves, at least they can think of one or two people who they know, or, maybe just some sort of a famous person who they can go, oh yeah, she's totally got it. Well, what's the it? Like, what is it about that? And then helping them dissect that as a way of understanding what they want to cultivate in themselves.
It really is all of those things. As you know, it's all of those, but I know you're offering up, again, windows into it. Where is it? Where's the recognition? Where's the awareness? It starts there and builds. I look at executive presence as really being the culmination, the pinnacle of being a good speaker, because you understand, you either intuitively or by practice understand what your personal manifesto is. You're not getting in the way of delivering that message. You are flexible. My definition, and by no means am I diminishing it by saying just these words, but I like the clarity. I like the impact of it. I always say executive presence. You recognize executive presence when you recognize that someone knows where they're going and is willing to take their listeners with them. Because that encompasses being inclusive. It encompasses being confident, certainly. It also encompasses being able to persuade and get buy-in, the willingness to take people with you, because they're willing to go with you,
right? Because
you know where you're going.
Yeah.
So that's a real simple statement for a very complex topic.
Right. I really like that, and I'm thinking about a leader who I know who is incredibly passionate, absolutely brilliant, CEO of a company, but is having a very hard time getting people to follow. And if people aren't following you, you can't just keep saying the same thing over and over again and hoping that somehow they'll get it. You have to take responsibility for either the quality of the vision or the quality of the way it's being communicated.
Right.
And maybe that the quality of the vision isn't there, and that's why these people are not following you. Or it may be that you haven't found a way to convey why it is important or essential or exciting or necessary or whatever. But you have to take the responsibility if people aren't following you, not to go, oh, they don't get it. Well, no, maybe it's you.
And yes, I find that it's true when people are very passionate like that. I'm going to use a phrase that Glenn has used before. They probably have not really delineated what's in it for them. What's in it for them? You can be as passionate as the day is long, but if you haven't determined what's in it for the people that you're speaking to or you're communicating to,
forget it.
It's a miss. It's a miss.
Right. I think you're making me think of something that my mother said to me many, many years ago. My mother was a math teacher, among other things. And she said one of the things that made her a really good math teacher is that she's not a mathematician. And so because it wasn't something that was just sort of intuitive and natural, but she had to learn how to learn it, she could teach other people how to learn. And that's clearly, because I was a little kid a long time ago, that stuck with me. That we have to find a way, both with the mental framework and the language, to connect with people and what their journey needs to be to understanding and to action.
It's funny you say that, because it's one thing that's held true with me for a couple of years, because it's been a couple of years since I was in middle school. We had an algebra teacher that was teaching us algebra, and they would teach us how to do something. And I would sit there and I'd figure out a different way. And I would say, can I do it this way? And he'd say, yes. And so as we were learning different tactics and skills, and finally I said, why are you teaching it this way when my way is so much simpler? He said, I have to teach it the way everyone can understand. Then other people that can understand it will come up with their own ways. And it really kind of epitomized that we have to have different ways of teaching and coaching different people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And a great leader knows that and can either find common language or can communicate in different ways with people in terms of how they need to hear things. And that goes to what we were talking before about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Not everybody learns the same way. And if we recognize that and we celebrate it, then we won't be so rigid. And we're probably going to have a lot more success because we're going to be adapting to make sure that there is a way in for everybody, a way into a project, a way into a campaign, a way into whatever it is you're working on.
Well, and one thing that I've seen from working for a large company is when you have that person up there teaching tactics, skill, or whatever, you're going to have different people amongst the team that get it like this. And they may have a different way of saying the exact same thing, that then if you can break out into smaller groups and they can kind of lead these other groups, you'll bring everyone along a lot quicker, because the way you say something may resonate with Paul, but the way Paul says something may resonate more with me.
Yeah, really good point.
Well, recorded, I had a good point this year.
Yeah, duly noted. Duly noted, Glenn. Let me ask you something that I remember from the first Blabbit that we did. What was it, 8 months ago? And that was, and I'm sure that it's still a big part of your teaching, but we were talking about, and these things are very true, very important these days, and that is having resilience, certainly, and balance. Yeah. Those two together.
Right.
And I know I'm pulling up something from months ago, but it doesn't go out of style.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's so necessary. Yeah. So, I think of, maybe we should start with sort of defining terms. So I think of resilience is how you bounce back from things. So resilience is not endurance, right? It's not how you go the distance. It's how you bounce back from adversity, challenges, setbacks. And that is incredibly important. And again, if it's helpful to people, think of a physical body analogy. You're resilient when you can bounce back from a cold because your immune system is otherwise strong. You can withstand a twisted ankle because you've got, you're working on, your musculature, and your stamina. And so at work, resilience is, okay, you get a setback. Somebody says something not so good to you. Yeah, you fail at something. A pandemic hits, right? So resilience is, how do you respond to it? And it's related to balance, because if you are essentially in decent balance, you can take those setbacks in and then, kind of recover and move forward. And balance, I always say balance is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not like you find it and, oh, great, I found balance. I'm done. No, it's a verb. We're always in it. We're always balancing. And so if we are really attuned to what it means to be in balance, physically, mentally, emotionally, with respect to work and life and all of that, then as obstacles come into our path, we're going to be more resilient. We're going to be able to bounce back from them a little bit more quickly and more completely. And so those two things are very much in relationship to each other. And by the way, you build resilience by encountering and dealing with challenges. It's not theoretical.
Right.
So when a challenge presents itself, I'm not necessarily we all become Buddhist and thank it, although please do if that's your if that's your path. But at least recognize that part of it is giving you something to respond to and learn from.
I usually don't use the words "thank you" when I'm challenged.
Nor do I.
I usually use some other choice words, but I could not agree with you more, Joanne. It really, challenges are opportunities.
Yeah,
and
they are. It seems like cliche, but it really is true. They're going to happen. I interviewed a friend of mine who has written a novel, and the title of our talk was "Necessary Obstacles." But if you think about any great piece of literature or play that you've seen or a movie, it's not interesting if everything goes well. Now, I'm not saying we should go out and look for these problems, but they are a part of life. And so how we deal with them and how we grow from them is really interesting. And if you are in a decent balancing state, it's a bit easier. It's not easy, but it can be easier to deal with it, so that the setbacks are temporary and they're opportunities for learning.
I thought this comment was kind of fitting, since it basically was a very nice way to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that's really very kind.
Jim, you're a great person.
Thank you very much.
Well, I have to tell you, Joanne, it is always a pleasure to have you here on Blabbit. We have covered some really, really interesting ground, as we always do. And I'm sure that everyone who is watching this broadcast and watching the replay of this broadcast is going to be intrigued about how to get in touch with you and learn more. So could you tell everyone, please?
Sure. Thank you. So I have a website, heymanpartners.com. And if you want to reach out to me, just email me info@heymanpartners.com. And that will come through to my email inbox. You can find me on Instagram @Joanne Heyman. You can find me on LinkedIn, Joanne Heyman. I'm not so active on Facebook these days, but a lot goes there. But if you want to get in touch with me directly, just please email me, and I'd be very happy to start a conversation.
John said it reminded him of Adam Grant, How to Love Criticism.
Yeah. Well, Adam Grant's one of my heroes, so thank you very much for that. I think he is a rock star.
There we go.
Yes.
Well, again, this is a great episode. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Joanne, thank you for being such a gracious guest and giving us your time and insights. And Glenn, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Well, I'm glad you have low expectations when seeing me. Thank you very much, Joanne. It's been great. Everyone, have a safe and healthy and happy 4th of July weekend, and we'll see everyone back here next week.
Thank you so much. It was great to see you guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.